Today's presentation is on the NBOMe-type hallucinogens, the NBOMe series of hallucinogens. Firstly, I'll just tell you a little bit about Dovetail. My name's Cameron and I work for Dovetail. We're a little project based here in Brisbane that provides clinical advice and professional support to workers, services and communities across Queensland who engage with young people affected by alcohol and other drugs. We don't work with young people directly, we work with services who work with young people. We can help out with complex cases or improving your policies and procedures around working with young people. Or if you're in a community where there's young people using alcohol and drugs, we can work with your whole sector, get all the services together to talk about working better together around young people and drugs. So we've also got a website, dovetail.org.au, where we host a lot of information on a whole range of different alcohol and drug topics. You can subscribe to our weekly email digest there on your screen, and once a week we'll send out the latest bits of news and information from the sector to help you do your job. So just subscribe on our homepage if you're interested. So the story of the NBOMe-type hallucinogens really starts with these two books, PiCal and TiCal, written by Alexander and Anne Shulgin in the 90s. PiCal stands for phenethylamines I have known and loved, and TiCal stands for tryptamines I have known and loved. And in these two books, Shulgin and his wife Anne, they got the phenethylamine core structure in PiCal and the tryptamine core structure in TiCal, and they tweaked it one molecule at a time, each time inventing a new substance, a new drug. This is a list of all of the tryptamines from TiCal, and as you can see there's a pretty significant list of chemicals there. Some of these are naturally occurring, other chemicals there are synthetic and newly discovered by Shulgin and his wife. On the screen there now you can see the chemicals from PiCal, the phenethylamines, a much larger number of substances that they invented, and most of these, there's a couple of naturally occurring ones, but most of those are synthetic, mostly hallucinogens. If we think about these as first generation Shulgin chemicals, the NBOMe hallucinogens are analogues of these analogues. So the most common NBOMes we're seeing at the moment are 25I NBOMe, 25B NBOMe and 25C NBOMe, which are all analogues of various phenethylamines. So they're analogues of 2CB or 2CI, etc. The first of the NBOMe type drugs was invented by Ralph Heim at the Free University of Berlin in 2003. He was looking for different drugs that worked on serotonin receptor sites so that they could track the action of other chemicals on serotonin receptors. It was David Nichols' lab, though, then conducted more research on that entire series and sort of expanded the range of chemicals. Now, these were chemicals, they're sometimes referred to as research chemicals because they were designed for research purposes. They weren't designed as recreational substances. But, you know, the researchers were publishing this as you do, and then other people could look at those publications and then go to a chemical manufacturer and have those chemicals produced for them. So we believe that the first of the NBOMes appeared on the illicit drug market in about 2010, and we know that mostly from looking at internet searches, and we know that from about 2010 the numbers of people punching NBOMe into Google started to increase, and that's probably when they appeared. We think the first reports of NBOMe in Australia came in about 2012, although I wouldn't be surprised if it had predated that by a little bit, but we have got some pretty solid evidence from about 2012 onwards. So the NBOMes are, as I mentioned, these are phenethylamines, so they are all hallucinogens. They're extremely potent, and one of the issues that we've had recently with NBOMe drugs has been overdose scenarios. So the active dose is 200 to 500 micrograms. Now, a microgram is really equivalent to a few grains of sand. That's a really minuscule size of a dose, and it's really difficult for people, if they've purchased some actual powder, to even imagine how small that dose is, or even to have scales that could weigh down to such a low level. So because the active dose is so low, the chance of overdose is quite high. The other issue with the NBOMe type of hallucinogens is that there appears to be a really steep dose response curve. So what that means is that the difference between someone having a fun night out or developing medical complications is a really tiny amount. We know this anecdotally because we've heard of people at parties who their friends, they appear to consume similar amounts of an NBOMe substance, but the person who has just the tiniest bit more than their friends ends up with significant complications. So So the difference between a fun night out and having problems from it is extremely fine, and we also suspect a little bit hard to predict. Because that dose response curve is so steep, there's also issues with body weight between different friends. Someone might weigh more than their friend and so may get a much more amplified effect. We also know that the NBOMe hallucinogens are less active when they are administered orally. So some of the NBOMes have turned up in pressed tablets being sold as ecstasy, and we know that some people who consume those as tablets get moderate effects, whereas if someone crushes one of those tablets and snorts it, they get a much more potent effect. So the effects are amplified when it is ingested via intranasal or a sublingual route of administration, under the tongue or up the nose. So that's been one of the issues that we believe has been occurring recently, is that there seems to be more risks associated with it when it's been snorted rather than just taken as a tablet. Having said that, you can still have harms from pills as well. In Australia, it's turned up as a blotter. So the blotter is a piece of cardboard, tiny, quarter of the size of a postage stamp. Usually, a blotter in Australia generally contains LSD, except now it's containing NBOMe as well. It's also turned up as a liquid or as a pill, a pressed tablet sold as ecstasy. It's also appeared as a capsule or a powder as well. The NBOMe chemicals have been associated with a number of adverse events, including deaths around Australia and around the world, and we'll talk a little bit about these in a sec. So this is a study from the UK from 2013, and it's a really interesting one because it's one of the really rare studies that actually got analytically confirmed NBOMe. In this case, 2,5-I NBOMe was the chemical, and they were able to actually document a whole range of clinical outcomes from these people who had presented to the hospital. And it's a really interesting paper. So you can see on the screen there what most of the features included. So tachycardia, high heart rate was probably the most common, elevated creatinine as well. Most of the people came in agitated as well, experiencing visual and auditory hallucinations. So you can see there the rest of what they had to say. Now, this has been a pretty common sort of story that people have been usually ending up in hospital due to the severe visual and auditory hallucinations. Because the doses required are so small, it seems like a tiny bit too much is causing this really extreme psychotic type reaction in people. On the screen there, this is a couple of stories from the media. I took these from 2012. This is when NBOMe was just really first starting to appear on the radar. These two cases are both from the US, but very similar to what we've seen around Australia as well. The basic story there is that, in the first case, the guy has had a single drop into his nose, so he's taken it intranasally, and then he's developed some pretty intense symptoms really quickly. He had a seizure, didn't regain consciousness, and passed away. Then there's another one there where this young fellow started freaking out, acting as if he was possessed. He laid him down in the bed, put a wet towel on his head to cool him down, and then he was found later not breathing. So these are pretty similar to what we've experienced in the last 12 months or so, that people are developing quite extreme psychotic reactions. In some cases, they're injuring themselves while they're under the influence. In other cases, they are having cardiac arrest. In the midst of this, the high body temperature has occurred there as well. You might recall now, going back to I think 2013 or 14, this is the death of Henry Kwan down in Sydney. So he had purchased what he had believed was LSD off a friend. They'd purchased it off, we believe, an online drug marketplace, and he'd consumed a tab at home, became really disorientated and jumped off the balcony, which resulted in his death. There's been another case in Australia very similar to this as well. Whereby a young person has jumped off a balcony in front of their parents. We've also had another death in Adelaide where someone had become really disorientated and banged their head into light poles until he died as well. So these are sort of the cases whereby people are injuring themselves while they're under the influence, either by jumping. There's been other cases where people have been hit by cars because they're so disorientated from the effects of the substance. On the screen there, this is a confirmed blotter containing 2,5-I NBOMe from Spain. This is from Europe. This had been sold as LSD. The bicycle on that blotter there is a reference to Albert Hofmann's bicycle Albert Hofmann invented LSD and rode his bicycle through his little village in Switzerland, which is why the bicycle is a LSD reference, but in this case it's containing 2,5-I-NBOMe. We don't have access to forensic information or seizure data on what is in the LSD in circulation, but there is some evidence from Europe that a large proportion of Blotter being sold as LSD in Europe at the moment has in fact turned out to be NBOMe. There's an LSD shortage globally at the moment for a number of different reasons, and so we actually believe that the LSD market has been got a significant amount of contaminated NBOMe circulating at the moment, which people may not be aware of. This is a real concern. In the past, there's not too many other chemicals that are potent enough to fit onto a piece of Blotter cardboard. So a lot of people who use acid or LSD, they are a bit blasé about the issue of impurities in their product, thinking that if they purchase a piece of cardboard Blotter and take it and something happens, it's LSD, or nothing, or there's no drugs in there. But that's actually not the case anymore. We know that NBOMe is turning up, being sold as LSD. Here's a couple more examples. These are from the US. There is some 2,5-C NBOMe and 2,5-B NBOMe, 400 micrograms on the left and 600 mics on the right-hand side there. This is a seizure from Adelaide in 2014. This is of Blotter, which was found containing 2,5-I-NBOMe. Not sure of the doses in that case. This is another seizure of 2,5-B NBOMe and also Adelaide. Again, this is Blotter, that's little cardboard tabs impregnated with NBOMe. But we've know it's also turned up in pressed tablets, and this has been happening from about 2014 onwards. In this case, this is a story from New South Wales where the police seized a batch of tablets containing 2,5-C NBOMe. They found a number of these tablets, and this is the tablet in question there. That's a Batman tablet. Now, I'll show you a couple of these pressed tablets, but just be aware that the numbers of pressed tablets in circulation is really high and they're constantly changing. So a blue Batman that I'm showing on the screen here may not be 2,5-C NBOMe at this point. The batches change frequently, but this is one that was confirmed 2,5-C NBOMe. This is one from Darwin, a pink Snapchat 2,5-C NBOMe. This one caused a mass overdose scenario across a number of entertainment venues where people had purchased this believing it to be ecstasy and consumed it. We're not sure how it was consumed, whether it was just orally or whether it had been snorted. But ambulances were called out to a number of nightclub venues across Darwin and hospitalised several people from that particular incident. This is another one. This is a blue Bugs Bunny. This was confirmed by Dr. David Caldecott, 2,5-C NBOMe and 2,5-I-NBOMe. Now, this particular batch of tablets has turned up all around Australia, including in Queensland. It's been in circulation for at least 2 years. We believe that they are still in circulation in Queensland at the moment. What we know is that when these tablets turn up in one community, they obviously cause lots of problems. People taking ecstasy don't expect to hallucinate for 18 to 24 hours. So once that happens, the word goes around that those tablets are worth avoiding. And what we've seen happen is that those tablets will disappear from that part of Australia, and in a few months' time they turn up somewhere else, cause a whole bunch of problems, and disappear again for 6 months and then turn up again somewhere else. So once we've got these batches of NBOMe tablets in circulation, they don't seem to leave circulation for a long time. So one of the issues with these pressed tablets is because, as I mentioned earlier, the active doses are really low. If a manufacturer's purchased some NBOMe powder and they're mixing it with a tablet filler, they're stirring it around and pouring it into a pill press, there's likely to be massive variation in doses across these batches of pills. So some of these pills could contain a significant dose of NBOMe, others may have way less NBOMe. So it wouldn't be uncommon across a group of people consuming a tablet like this to only have one or two have an adverse event and other people not have as many problems. There's a lot of variation. Now this is an image of some liquid 2,5-I-NBOMe from South Australia, in this case in a mouthwash bottle. So we do know that it has appeared in a liquid form as well. So what is some harm reduction advice? What can we tell people who are using drugs, and what can they do to keep safe? Obviously, the safest option is not to take illicit drugs. We don't know how they're manufactured or where they're coming from. Now, for people who are going to take illicit drugs, we do need to let them know that NBOMe can appear in blotter or liquid and be sold as LSD. As I mentioned, a lot of people who have used LSD in the past are not worried about contaminants, not in the same way that ecstasy users might be, but we do need to let people know who use LSD know that their LSD might contain something different. So they really need to be informed of that. Now, we know that there is a home reagent test. Now, this is like a home reagent test is a little bottle of liquid you can purchase from a herbal high store. And in this case, the Ehrlich reagent test will test for LSD. So if someone purchased a blotter and they think it's LSD, all they need to do is purchase that reagent test kit, add a few drops of the liquid to it. If it turns purple, it will indicate that it is LSD or a similar tryptamine. If it is an NBOMe, it'll have no reaction. Now, home test kits have got a number of limitations, particularly for testing ecstasy tablets, pressed tablets. That's partly because the pressed tablets can contain a number of different drugs, which mean the reagent test will give up a false result. Now, in the case of blotter, it's likely that the reagent test is much more effective because it's generally going to be LSD or a similar tryptamine or no reaction for an NBOMe. So an Ehrlich reagent test is a viable option for people who want to try to identify the presence of LSD. We also should let people know that they should avoid snorting pills or capsules just because the NBOMe effects are amplified when snorted. As I've already mentioned, some people consume them orally and don't have too many problems, whereas their friend crushes up the pill and snorts it and gets a much more amplified effect. So while people are unsure of what might be in their drugs, they really should be avoiding snorting pills or capsules and unknown powders just in case it is an NBOMe. We're also advising people to just consume a quarter of their dose orally and then wait at least an hour to an hour and a half before taking any more. Because it's just so hard to determine what might be in a substance and how easy it is to overdose, the safest advice really is to consume just the tiniest amount possible and then wait to see what happens after that, and not to consume anything else until people have got some idea of what the effect might be. We also need to let people know to avoid mixing substances. It's possible that there's some pretty potent interactions between drugs like MDMA and the NBOMe hallucinogens. We don't know exactly the nature of that. It's possible that the NBOMe in combo with MDMA could increase the risk of serotonin toxicity. We don't know that for sure, but it's possible that there are interactions between NBOMe and other drugs. So if people are using, say, ecstasy, they should avoid using any other substances alongside that and avoid mixing different batches of pills together as well. We also need to get the message out that people really do need to seek medical attention if some unexpected effect occurs. So some of those unexpected effects could be extreme disorientation, agitation, or delirium. Now, obviously, hallucinogens create disorientation types of effects, so you'd generally expect that if you take a drug like LSD. What seems to happen with the NBOMes, though, is that there's actually the disorientation is quite extreme. Some recent cases, people were unable to speak, were unable to get words out, they couldn't stand up, they were rolling around on the floor. In a case like that, you really need to seek urgent medical attention. Because some of the deaths that have occurred in Australia have been because people have injured themselves while they're under the influence. As I've already mentioned, people have been hit by cars, they've jumped off balconies while they've been under the influence. So being extremely disorientated from a substance is really risky. You also need to seek urgent medical attention if there's an increase in body temperature, because some of these chemicals may cause serotonin toxicity. So increased body temperature could be a potential high-risk sign. Also increased heart rate if someone has a seizure, difficulty breathing, or really any other complication that is unusual out of the ordinary from the use of a hallucinogen. Now, people who take LSD can have pretty extreme effects. Generally, you can talk someone down from a bad trip. You can put them in a safe space, low stimulus, reassure them, divert their attention onto something different. And usually with LSD, that will be relatively effective relatively quickly. If you attempt a very basic talk down or a very basic sort of approach in terms of reducing stimulus to calm someone down, if that does not work immediately, you may have a more intense problem you need to deal with, and so you should seek urgent medical attention. I think because we're not really used to drugs like NBOMe being in circulation, we are used to LSD being around, we are used to people having bad trips at music festivals and so forth, that sometimes we maybe are a little bit not quick enough to get help in some of these cases, because we do think we can talk them down. Now, the world has changed, unfortunately, and we need to be very concerned about any hallucinogen ingestion and what the effects of that might be. So we've just got a little bit of further information. We'll post this into the comments section on YouTube so you can copy and paste those. If you have any trouble accessing any of the papers and you'd like a copy, just drop us an email and we can get those to you. Otherwise, contact your librarian. If you work in a hospital, you should have access to a librarian, or CKN for Queensland Health Staff, or even your local council library. You can often access full text academic articles. So we'll post a few of these for you in the comments section. If you've got any other questions or concerns or other information about the NBOMe-type hallucinogens that you're interested in, don't hesitate to get in touch and give us a call.